We're going to read another story out of Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 13. When Jesus heard it, and if you read in Matthew chapter 14, what he's talking about there is when Jesus heard, he had just heard about the death of John the Baptist. And so when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them. And he healed their sick. And when it was evening, the disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And so he's telling his disciples, giving them instructions. You feed this multitude of people. There was probably about 13,000 people there. There's 5,000 men, and the women and children weren't counted. And so most Bible scholars believe that there's probably about 13,000 people there. Now McLean is like 700 people. Shamrock, how big is Shamrock? Probably 7,000 people. Pampa is about 25,000 people. So you're talking about half the population of Pampa, Texas, I think. Somebody might have to fact check me. We're following alongside Jesus, and he tells the disciples, feed them. You give them something to eat. And they said to him, verse 17, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fishes. A very small amount, amen? A very small amount. He said, bring them here to me. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples. And the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And the thing that I think is interesting about that is that not only did God perform a miracle to create something out of nothing, basically, out of a very small seed, God created something. And when it was over and everybody was finished, there was more than enough left over. They took up baskets and baskets of what was left over. And that was in chapter 14. And if you go into chapter 15, Jesus does almost the exact same miracle again. Matthew 15, verse 32. Now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And to be clear, this was 2 separate events. This was not a single event. And I believe that the significance of that this happens twice, is relevant to us. We should take note of this and be able to recognize that not only did Jesus do it once, he did it twice. He did it once, but he'll do it again. Then the disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7 and a few little fish. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks, broke them, gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up the 7 large baskets full of the fragments that were left. Now those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitude, got into the boat, and came to the region of Magdala. And church, what I want to say about this and the lesson that is within this is that God can do so much more with the little that we have than we believe. Can you imagine looking at 13,000 people? I mean, did anybody ever figure out how many people were in Shamrock? 1,700? Wow, that is not nearly as embarrassing as it is for McLean to only have 700. Half the size of Pampa. Half the size of, is that right, Dave? Do you know? How big is Pampa? 16,000? So just about the size of Pampa. Can you imagine looking out and seeing a multitude of people, and somebody brings Jesus a few fish and a few loaves, and Jesus says, this is going to feed everybody? What in our flesh, what would we say? There ain't no way. There's no way that God could feed all those people with this much food. There's no way that Jesus could perform a miracle. Is that what we would say in our flesh? We know the story. It's easy to say, well, God did a miracle sitting on this side of history. But let me tell you something, church. God is still in the miracle business today. And He is still willing and still able to multiply. And the thing that I want to talk to you about this morning, I hinted to it earlier, because I've always looked at these situations, the oil being multiplied, the loaves and the fishes being multiplied, and it's always spoke to me about material resources. And in our flesh, I believe that's why it's so easy for us to say that would be impossible to believe. But what if we apply it just real spiritually speaking? Because I know that there's a lot of people in this place that have big dreams in their hearts of things that they want to do for God and ways that they want to serve God. And you're looking at yourself and you're saying, all I have is just a little bit. Pastor Clay, I just barely have enough faith to get to next Sunday. And if we apply the principles of this story this morning to what we perceive of who we are and who we are in God, then I believe that something can be awakened inside of us this morning.